For this series of techniques, we're going to be looking at splatter, which can allow you to have bursts of color. This can be used in galaxy situations to add stars. It can be used to add texture, add things to make something look rustic, and it can be layered with colors. We're also going to look at using wiping, ways to spread paint using unconventional materials, to get overlapping lines, to collect paint at the edges, and to create different textures or patterns. We're going to wrap up talking about sponging, ways to create broken textures, layers of color, and things that can emulate things like foliage or leaves on trees. Splatter technique can be a fun way to add a splash of color, and it's pretty straightforward and simple to do. To make it a reality in your painting, you're going to need a few materials. The first one is a brush. If you want a different approach to splatter painting, though, you can substitute it with an old toothbrush, preferably one that's laying around and that somebody hasn't used to brush their teeth recently or will not be using again. So an old scrubbing toothbrush can work as well. To help thin the paint down, you're going to want to make sure you have a little bit of water. Of course, you'll want to have paint in your paint palette. But importantly, whenever you're splatter painting, to protect your area, you're going to want to have a piece of scrap paper to place that painting on top of. So I'm going to set my paper down, and I'm going to place my test tile here. And what I'm going to do is first I'm going to show you how to use the brush, and then I'm going to show you how to use a toothbrush. If you're working in this technique and you're going to be using it in a large area, it may also be wise to wear a smock or an old t-shirt. So whenever we're starting out, I'm going to use a little bit of blue paint on this, but I want to water it down. So I'll take some blue paint, I'm going to put it on the corner here, and just like any of our other techniques that we want the paint to move, whether that's glazing or anything like that, we want to add some water. The thinner the paint, the less viscous or thick it's going to be, and it's going to be easier to splatter. Now I don't need a lot on here, but I just want to put a little bit on the top, watered down. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold it with one hand, and I'm going to flick it with another. So this flicking motion, and obviously the more water you use can help with the splatter, will allow us to get bursts of color. If you want to use another tool, a toothbrush can work really well by using watered down paint on the bristles. So typically I'll dip this in water, pick up some watered down paint, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my thumb, I'm going to rake it over, and whenever it releases, those bristles are going to shoot paint out. And this can be a little bit more efficient. Whenever you're done, make sure to clean up your tools and clean up your working area. Again, placing an area with scrap paper or other surface to protect your other areas can work well. This technique can also be combined with masking to control the area where the paint goes. For wiping, you're going to try to create a broken texture, similar to dry brush. But for this, you're going to need to use a hard surface that can wipe across your surface that you're painting on. For this, we tend to use pieces of cardstock or chipboard or mat board. You can also use a palette knife. For this demo, I'm going to go through the process using a piece of chipboard. And it's pretty simple. You're just going to pick up a little bit of paint on the end of it, and then you're going to slide it across. So the wiping pattern allows you to create swatches. And this can be used to create brick textures, any interesting combinations. It can also be used with glazing to create layers of color, and it's just a nice way to bring in some kind of shaped spaces. If you want, you can always cut the shape of your chipboard and experiment with how that will create different outlines or blocks of shape. One of the interesting things about this is that the color will pool into thicker areas near the edges of where you wipe. This is somewhat similar to how the saran wrap works, and it can create cool areas of relief or texture on your painting. You can also go back in and try to wipe out other areas or smooth it out after it is partially dried to create layers, so we can get some transparent overlapping there. So a piece of chipboard, a little bit of paint, and you can move it around your painting surface to create different textures or effects. Sponging can be a fun, quick way to get some textures. It can be layered over colors or be done as the underlayer. The effects can be similar to saran wrap, but they create their own unique characteristics based on the texture of the sponge. You can find different sponges, but typically what you want to use is a dry sponge because that's going to have the most texture. What we're going to do is take a little bit of color, and we're going to stamp it on using that sponge. So I have a little swatch of yellow here. And I'm just going to press down using the surface of the sponge that I want to use. And then I'm going to apply that onto my painting surface to get a broken texture. Sponging can be fun because you can cut the sponge into different shapes and use that as you layer, or you can also layer colors by using different sides of your sponge. So I'm going to layer some blue on here, maybe get some green mixtures. So you can go through and layer this up to build dense areas. This would work well for foliage or different organic shapes that may grow. Once you're done with your sponge, I do encourage you to rinse it out under a faucet so that the paint doesn't stick on there, so you can use it again for future use.